Ladies and gentlemen, this is Pan-Africa Vision, and I am your host, Ambe Fokwa. Diving directly into this edition of this grandiose program broadcasted to you from Afrique Media, your Pan-African channel, we're going to be talking about a legendary icon here on the African continent, someone who, since around June 6th, or should we say June 8th, fell into a deep ailment, a critical condition, it was at one point even said, and everyone thought we were going to lose him. Maybe if you're just coming from Mars, you might not know that Nelson Mandela, the former post-apartheid South African president, has been extremely ill and is now recovering. But we want to look at Mandela in the light in what is he worth to Africa? If we lost Mandela, what would it mean to Africa? What has he represented? Looking at all of these ideas today in this program, which brings you an African conscious look at the way things are evolving on the planet. We've put together a team of panelists to help us dissect this particular individual and that topic. Before we do want to start, we want to motion quickly to some images to help us look at the situation that we have been viewing Mandela in now for almost a month.
South Africa's ailing anti-apartheid hero, Nelson Mandela, has started his second month in the Pretoria hospital. The former president was admitted to the hospital on June the 8th and has been receiving treatment for a recurring lung infection.
It's been a while now and being in the hospital, and I hope he'll recover because we need him, we still need him, and the world needs him also. On
July the 4th, South African President Jacob Zuma visited Mandela and said he remained in a critical but stable condition. The failing health of the 94-year-old Mandela, a figure admired globally as a symbol of struggle against injustice and racism, has reinforced the realization that the father of the post-apartheid South Africa will not be around forever.
I have fought very firmly against white domination. I have fought very firmly against black domination. I cherish the ideal of a new South Africa, where all South Africans are equal.
We say to him, he must get well and have a speedy recovery. We say to the family, they must not listen to the rumors saying this and that. They must just have strength that Tata gets better.
While he lies in the hospital, a rollover grave site has split Mandela's family. 2 years ago, Mandela's grandson Mandla moved the bodies of 3 of Mandela's children from a family cemetery in Kunu, the village where Mandela spent most of his childhood, to the nearby village of Mvezo. But a high court on July the 3rd ordered that the remains be exhumed and reburied in Kunu. In a court affidavit filed 2 weeks ago, Mandela's eldest daughter, Makaziwe, argued for an urgent hearing, saying her father was in a serious condition and breathing with the aid of life support. Mandela will be celebrating his 95th birthday on July the 18th.
So help me God.
Demi Samuel, TVC News.
And of course, you did see it very, very clearly there. The ailment of Mandela has put a small tussle even inside the family, causing us to really look at South Africa and question, is Mandela sometimes even being over-plagiarized in the media? We'll be, of course, developing that thought as the program does evolve. But to start off, we want to start with our very first panelist, Mr. Arison Tamfu. Arison, welcome to Pan-Africa Vision.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm happy to be here.
Yes, and as you've noticed, we've been talking about the man Nelson Mandela. Now, when you hear this name Nelson Mandela, what are the thoughts that are evoked in you?
The first thing is that he's an icon, and it's well known. This is somebody who inspired billions around the world. He was the father of the nation. He was one of the founding fathers of democracy in South Africa. And this is somebody who fought not only against white domination, but also against black domination. This is somebody who believed in truth and stood for truth, and even as he's living his last moment, he's still standing for truth and inspiring many around the world.
That's really, and like you're saying, even though some people are afraid when they hear that kind of statement, his last moment, actually we want to begin to reflect on that. I want to now hand over to Mr. Ako Nkongo Mengold, who is here as an electrical, petrol, and gas consultant. And though this question might not be in your direct domain of profession, we're here speaking as Pan-Africanists, and we all know that that is where we are definitely, should I say, extremely enlightened. Now, after looking at that idea and that possibility of losing Mandela, how would you see Africa after the loss of this great political, cultural, and should we say, even socioeconomic icon?
Thank you very much for inviting me to this emission on African Media. I think the loss of Mandela, which could happen anytime from now, from what we know, should not be a discouraging factor. Mandela is one who has stood for nearly a century of his life. In fact, in 6 days' time, or 5 days' time, he should be celebrating his 95th birthday.
Yes, that's right.
And if it happened that he could move on to that date, and if he passes away after getting to 95, it will just be like he lived for a century, just less 5 years. I think even if he passes away, the lessons that the continent should learn are one of somebody who stood courageously, even at the menace of losing his life. He stood courageously for the principles of justice, as he called himself at the beginning, one man, one vote, which he insisted. Even when he was asked to be released on condition, he refused to be released from prison, which I think he served for about 27 years total. Robben Island for most of that time, 18 years, and then he went to Portsmouth and other places, and then he was put on what they call residence surveillée. And we know finally Frederick de Klerk came along, yes, and with him things went on well. They negotiated for a multiracial free South Africa, which I think the legacy Mandela has left for those 5 years he was president, is that he managed to bring the South African multiracial society together to accept the principle of one man, one vote, and to accept the white minority, which remains a minority today, but which, of course, we must recognize, helped to develop South Africa to what it is today as, I would say, the first nation on the continent. So whether he passes away or not in the coming days, we think he has left behind a very huge legacy, which other African heads of state should copy, should borrow from. We know cases of Thomas Sankara, who was also young, and in that light, we know cases of even Gaddafi, who passed away or who was killed, who had a vision for Africa. We all know about what Gaddafi was hoping for. We know about Kwame Nkrumah, yes, and the list continues of some who I would want to say can borrow the leaf from the actions of Nelson Mandela.
And really, we want to continue evolving that idea. Just like you pointed out, Nelson Mandela has created a legacy throughout his entire 95 years. And in some few days, we'll be looking at July 18th, in which we will see him transition from 94 to 95. But we want to continue to look at this aspect in this light, now handing over to Mr. Nuga Paul Venan. Now, we have understood the legacy of Mandela from Mr. Mengo. But at this age, battling this sickness, do you think that Mandela is still relevant in South African politics and even African politics at large? Pan-Africanism, do you think that there's still a link there?
Well, first of all, I would like to thank you for inviting me to African Media. What I can say about that is that Mandela is no more relevant to South Africa. He has played his part. And now what he has done, it should be an example to some of us, to the Africans, who are still looking for kind of leaders, to copy his own way. Because so many people in Africa, when they get to power, or when they are prepared to go to power, they promise so many things. But whenever they get to power, they will become lions for the people, for the population. But Mandela has been a kind of man who has been sincere from the beginning, up to at the time he reached at the highest position in his country. And that is something that we should copy for him. That kind of personality he has developed, and charisma. That he has not changed his position at all. He loves his people, not only the black, but everybody, because I think everyone has been released, has been delivered from, because when in those times, when those days when the apartheid was still existing, even the white were not free. They were war every moment, every day. So Mandela played a part to free the whole South Africa. Everybody has been free from the time he has come to power. And today, white and black can cope, can move together, can develop their country together. It's not as in those days that the white were in a way They were controlling every good things, and the black were there. But in a certain way, spiritually, everyone has been free. Everyone has been released. Everyone has been delivered from the time Mandela has taken things. But now it's no more important as people think. It's no more relevant. It is just there as a worldwide icon. People can visit him. He has played his own role. He has marked a generation. It's left to others now to do the same thing instead of focusing their attention on him only, while forgetting to play their own role. Everybody should try to mark his own generation.
Actually, it's time for other Africans to, of course, rise up and play their own roles in statesmanship. And he has been that great example of a statesman. Now, looking at what you said, what really struck and caught me is the fact that you pointed out that, of course, he did unify South Africa, which is what he is most greatly revered for on the face of this planet. Coming out of prison, a lot of people would have expected him to carry some bitterness and taken the stand of what other Southern African presidents like Robert Mugabe took to actually oust the minority, white or maybe Caucasian is a better politically correct term, from the country. Now I want to ask this question to you now, Mr. Arison Tamfu, looking at the way Mandela handled the situation. We know that we have the black supremacist ideology behind Pan-Africanism to a dimension. There's the neutral form that deals with integration. There is the extreme form that actually looks at total domination. Do you think that Nelson Mandela handled the situation rightly by going after the integrationist point of view?
I think it was a wonderful idea. You know, from the very word go, his wife, Winnie Mandela, was against the idea that Mandela should be freed from prison and integrate the white community, the white minority, into the government. But Mandela understood that this was a question of humanity. It was a multiracial society, and in order to live peacefully, in order to permit peaceful coexistence between the white minority and the black majority, there needed to be some kind of agreement. That is why you had the first deputy president, F.W. de Klerk, as he was a white. Mandela included him in his government, and one of the very first things that he did when he was elected president of South Africa was to create a government of national unity, an inclusive government where everybody will be regarded as human beings, regardless of your color, regardless of where you come from. And this played positively for the South African community, and also sent a message to the rest of the world. Today, in parts, we have racism fought completely due to the example of Nelson Mandela, because this is somebody who told people that we were human beings created by one God. Our color means nothing. And the fact that he succeeded after this struggle, after struggling with the Zulu chief, with his wife, Winnie Mandela, and other blacks who believed that it was their own time to dominate. But Nelson Mandela told them that, hey, hold on. We are one people. We can live together and we can grow together as a nation. If South Africa is what it is today, and the rest of the continent, because we have a similar situation in Zimbabwe where Robert Mugabe was telling the whites that leave the lands belong to us. Mandela told him that no, it's not supposed to be like that. These are our brothers and sisters. We have a color difference, granted, but we can live together. He sent a message to Europe, America, Asia, where racism was still a very big problem. Mandela became a symbol of unity, of humanity. He became that person who inspired the peaceful coexistence of blacks and whites. And so it was a great idea that he opted for a government of national unity and integration.
Yes, no, thank you, Mr. Arison, because looking at that idea, what is unfortunate is, as you were pointing out, Robert Mugabe took the leftist position on black consciousness, Pan-Africanism. Ironically now, we see Zimbabwe has suffered a very, very deplorable economic situation as a result of this. Now, some people might say it's internal mismanagement.
The white supremacy. because Mandela stood for Pan-Africanism.
Exactly.
He believed in Africa. That is why when he left his village and went to the township in South Africa, to the city, to attend school. He was taught by the whites. They taught him the Western culture, but he still insisted that he needed his African culture. He inherited that from his father, who was a chief.
Yes, just to interject there a bit, you know that
just
the
to
name.
interject.
Yes, let me just interject this. You know, his name Nelson is not actually a birth certificate natural name.
Yes.
It's a name that I read his biography that his South African teacher gave him
on his first day in school. On his first day in school. Now, to talk about the consistent white supremacy, let me give you a situation where we have neighboring Nigeria here. It's Africa's second largest economy. Now, the oil and gas, the extractive industries contribute enormously to the economy of this great nation. But they still depend largely on the technical know-how of the white men. So in this case, you see that the independence of Africa in general, because a lot of countries in Africa where extractive industries, where natural resources have been discovered. I speak on the control of our engineer here, who is well known for this kind of question. They still depend largely on the technical know-how, the expertise of the white man. So to an extent, what we now have is quasi-independence. Because if you cannot control your economy entirely, if you are getting instructions from somewhere else, because you don't have experts on the field who can operate, who can tell you that if we discover oil here, this is what we're going to do. If we see something here, this is what we're going to do. So Mandela helped to solve this problem in South Africa. He realized that the blacks, the whites, were knowledgeable in certain fields more than the blacks. And so he integrated them into the system, in such a way that the blacks could benefit from the whites, as well as the whites could benefit from the blacks. I think this is an example that should be copied by other African nations, where the white men can come here to help us with the technology. But we have our brothers, our African brothers, who can also learn from them in such a way that when they return to their countries, our brothers back home can continue to operate.
Actually, and with that idea, we need to understand that when we talk of development and the evolution of civilization, it doesn't matter where it's coming from, so long as you are applying it. That's what I'm essentially understanding from you. And if we know that the Western nation has gone forward, we have to benefit from the technology and their own research, add it to our own culture and advancement. And of course, the world will reach its globalized vision. Now, I want to land concretely now with Mr. Mengo with this idea. Had the Western nations not come to Africa, I want to ask you, what would it have been today? Would we have been further advanced or perhaps behind? Because when we start looking at the evolution of Pan-Africanism, we have to look at the aspect of colonialism, the aspect of slavery. We look at China today. China has not been influenced heavily by Western culture except to maybe take some aspects of technology. But you see, they have at last arrived where they are to even start dominating the world economy, rivaling actually, should we say, before dominating, but it seems economically they're already there. If Africa had not faced colonialism and slavery, if South Africa had not faced the apartheid, would we have gone forward? Or would we have still had to rely on Western intervention to, should we say, straighten our administrations?
Thank you. That's a very pertinent issue. I would like to say there's no way we can cancel out history. Slavery, followed by colonialism, and then independence of African nations cannot cancel the fact that the white or the Western technology began many, many years ago. And the fact that we were colonized and we had to somehow adapt or adjust ourselves to borrowed, I would call it borrowed technology, just means that we have to keep looking ahead and not look backwards. If we had stayed in the pure traditional African context, we wouldn't have had Western technology. So it would be so difficult for one to now judge whether we could have evolved on what basis. No airplane, no motor car, not even a bicycle, which is still from abroad. The wheel was not discovered by an African. We may have evolved in our African tradition, maybe, I don't know, trying to perfect our kingdoms and things like that. But it is just like going now to the villages. The villages which are really secluded. If you go there, you see a big difference between the city of Douala and those villages. We can call those villages the pure African context, where maybe you don't even see a television set somewhere, nor will you see an electric bulb of even 40 watts. I mean, the real hinterland. That is the kind of Africa which Africa would have looked like had it not been colonization. So I'm just sorry to say it, but somehow, because of the cold weather out there in Europe and the Americas, the white man began discovering the present day technology, the steam turbines, things to get themselves warm. They were forced to do that because of their context. And since they arrived at technology and the things which we now know today, ships, building ships and the rest, they colonized us because they could move to this continent by ship, by sea. And then we have to accept it. And like he said, we have to now learn from what they're doing, and why not be able to also do it ourselves tomorrow, DIY, do it yourself. Not necessarily depend 100% on the white man, but try also with the knowledge we've got from them, because we go to school with them in their own schools and universities. We excel, so why shouldn't we be able to come back with that knowledge, like he said, and excel on our continent, given that we're using the same technology, the same natural resources, like iron, like copper, whatever we use to manufacture all these things, we have them here as raw material. Even in Cameroon, you all know how much we have in Cameroon as raw material. We should be able to use the knowledge the white man has taught us, some of us who have been engineers for nearly 4 decades, to do something for our own country without necessarily, but always knowing that because of globalization, we may always give contracts to white companies to come and implement projects in our countries. But we should be able to work as a team now, instead of working as colonialized people who don't even know anything.
No, let me really cut you short there. Okay, go ahead.
That is why.
I want to allow Mr. Fontem to comment.
Pan-Africanism is a liberal concept. It doesn't mean that since we are in Africa, we must preserve only what is African. It means that while preserving what is African, we can also welcome something from somewhere else, so long as it doesn't destroy the African as it is, as it was naturally. Because there are Pan-Africanists on the continent who are so resistant to things that are coming from the other continents. They believe that they are coming to tap from us and go away with it. Now, if the white man is coming, or the Americas are coming, Europe,
UK,
Asian continent,
Italy,
whoever is coming, you have something which is good. We need to get to the person, take what we can take from there, and add it to our own culture in order to expand. We are living in a global community. The world now is a global village. Pan-Africanism is no longer only African. We depend on them, like in parts, but not entirely.
Good. And before we do want to go to a transition from Egypt, I want to hand over lastly to Mr. James Fontem, because I saw you sitting very quiet. I know you are a man of African conscious mind. Do you share the same point of view as Mr. Mengo?
I want to say that the legacy that Nelson Mandela has left behind is a legacy that does not only profit South Africa, it profits Africa and the world as a whole. Because one good thing we should learn from Mandela is the fact that he's humane, he's patient, and he has a good sense of direction. And because of this, you would see that even when he would not be there, South Africa would still remain very strong, because some of the incidents would be historic. When I was in Cape Town last year, we received quite a big number of tourists coming in, and all of them were moving just to where Mandela spent his life as a prisoner, which means that South Africa is making already money from tourism, going to visit where Mandela was. And one good thing we should also learn from Mandela is that we should understand that time is not everlasting. And the time you are on the stage, you should do what you want to do. And when you think you cannot continue, you should give up. Because Mandela had the possibility of going in for a second term as a president. He said, no, I have done it. Let some other person do it. Other African countries should copy from that example. Again, he's brought blacks and whites together in South Africa. And this image that he did contaminated other countries where blacks and whites were not together. And we're talking of development. We should understand that as Tamfu said, the world is now a global village, which means that one hand has to wash the other. White has to be with the black, and they have to sit, discuss together, because if they want to work alone, the raw material is still in Africa. And Africa needs also the finished product. So with all this put together, you realize that Mandela has left behind something that we would continue to learn from, even when he would not be there. Look at the industries that were created. I'll take some of the telecommunication companies that are spreading all over Africa today, which have headquarters in South Africa. You see, when they go to a place to develop that place, they don't do like some companies come and rent a place, and when the business is not going, they take their values away. They go there, invest there, use the people there, and teach them to do it. And I think that is something that has to be copied.
Definitely. So, of course, we've seen what Mandela has contributed to the African continent with those particular points of view. Now, adding a little bit more spice to the program, should we say, we want to now look at some issues that came into the news also from Northern Africa, because we've been pointing out that with those points that we got, we see that industrialism, certain aspects of Africa have evolved due to interaction with the West. But in Egypt specifically, the aspect of democracy, which was introduced through the, should we say, the Arab Spring Revolution, which hit the Northern African continent some 2 years ago, seems to have left that particular region of the continent unstable. So while we do see, of course, Western integration in the Pan-African philosophy and the evolution of Africa going forward, we do see in some aspects there are some hitches. So we want to look at Egypt, and then we'll come back and we'll talk a little bit on just some of the influences that we are getting from the West in that light. And that was just a brief transition to let you know that you are following the Pan-African vision, where we take a look at Africa through the eyes of African consciousness to help evolve the Pan-African vision of the founding fathers of that idea and thought to contribute to the African Renaissance. Now, as that Renaissance is going on, we want to see how Egypt is battling through a democratic hurdle to stand forward to continue to grow with the continent.
Egyptians on Friday prayed there would be no repeat of clashes that have killed more than 90 people last week in the bitterly divided Arab nation. Officials say mercy is still being held at the Republican Guard compound in Cairo, where troops killed 53 Islamist protesters earlier this week. On one side of the city, Tahrir Square remains the symbolic center of the revolution that overthrew Hosni Mubarak and later opposed Morsi.
I demand the return of legitimacy, the return of President Morsi. Everyone here has one clear demand, which is the return of legitimacy.
Across town in an eastern district, Morsi's supporters have marched around a major intersection in front of a mosque of Rabah al-Adiwiya. The Muslim Brotherhood is outraged by the overthrow of Morsi and demands his release from detention and his reinstatement as president.
The army betrayed the legitimate government, the elections and the will of the people. I want the return of President Morsi.
However, the unrest has also raised fears over security in the Sinai Peninsula bordering Israel and the Palestinian Gaza Strip. Vivian Nsot, TVC News.
And of course, as we were looking at those images, the idea did come to me as I was talking just before we did transition there. We see Egypt, we see the evolution of democracy, something that before never existed in the North African Arab world with its Islamic roots of having, should we say, theocratic governments which are mostly based on the religious beliefs and institution of the Sharia law, which does not give the rights to women to have so much liberalism, does not give certain rights to education for women. We see other aspects in which the society is controlled by a strict belief and adherence to religion. Now, when the Arab Spring erupted, which began in Tunisia with a young man setting himself on fire, it really caught like wildfire and spread all through North Africa, and the sub-Saharan African presidents and countries were afraid that we're going to catch the fire down here. But specifically now, talking about Egypt, we see that democracy has destabilize the environment, though giving liberalism. We see it's allowing an exploitation of some of their resources, like we said, was beneficial to the African continent, though some people might say to a greater degree it's to fuel a capitalist reality which might not benefit a more communistic Africa. But in reality, the question I'm trying to bring out is this. Now, was the military right to remove Mohamed Morsi? That is the problem that we're seeing now when democracy has been instituted into an environment which naturally from its cultural roots it was not used to. And now we see, just roughly a year after having been president, democratically voted, ironically, the military came forward and said that his administration was not properly executing up to the expectations of the Egyptian citizens and stepped forward. Well, the Western nations now are viewing the possibility of it being a military coup, even though this week we heard reports that the United States had sent forward some 3 fighter jet planes. We're looking at all of these aspects. Western realities on one side, democracy on the other, capitalism sending airplanes to a country that's currently at war. It's kind of funny. Was the military right to topple this regime and institute an interim administration?
Yes, well, before I proceed, in my opinion, I think that democracy is not an African value. And we should not go into it brutally. We should go to gradually with methodology. Because the Egyptian, they have built their country with how can I call it, with strong belief in their religion.
Yes.
Okay. Now, when they impose them democracy, we usually say that the way you make your bed is the way you sleep. They started very badly with democracy. The will is that democracy should get involved in all the countries, but it's not in that way. Okay, they did not remove the former president because he was not applying democracy. They were fed up of him. They wanted him to go. He has stayed for long. Okay, but they removed him in a brutal way by going out. And when they have succeeded in removing him by going out, now it has become a mode of life for them. When they don't want something, they go out. And from there, that they want to build their democracy. So that can't last for long. That's why even the military people who are there, they are not ready, because now the Muslims now want to control everything whenever they go to power. They want to impose the religion to everybody. But I don't even think that they can say the Muslim, only the Muslim, because I think 90% of Egyptians are Muslim people. But now, who are they? Who are they? Are they extremists? Are they fundamentalists? They have to precise. Because they cannot say that 90% of people are against, or only 10% who can really go on the road and remove the former president Mohamed Morsi. So I think the way now the Muslims want to make the law or to create a certain number of things, it doesn't please everyone, because the people want to be free. They have been stuck so many years, so they want to be open to everybody in the whole world. So when the Muslims come down to power, they want to, even the military are not happy for that. So the military can use their power to push him aside and to put another people who's going to listen for them. And it is very bad. Therefore, democracy will never stand in that country, because even the one who is there is not going to work as the military want them to do. They're going to send him away in the same manner. So that's why I can say about that.
And really, go ahead.
I wanted to add that the Morsi regime had ignored the basic principles of democracy from the very word go. What was happening in Egypt was what we call political Islamism. Now, you mentioned at your introductory statement the concept of liberalism. They didn't give space for other ideas to be part of the government, and it was a democracy of the people in power and not democracy of the people, of the Egyptian people. That was a very big problem, that the Muslim Brotherhood came to power, and instead of operating as a political party, it was operating as a religious party. This meant that other ideas could not be welcomed. It was not an inclusive government, a government of national unity, like what we were saying regarding Nelson Mandela, who included everybody, whites and blacks. They ignored the principles. It was clear that there was going to be a revolution. With that, it was just a question of time, waiting to kick off. So, in this case, we cannot really blame the Western world. It was an African, in general terms, problem, and in particular terms, an Egyptian problems.
Good.
These are Egyptians fighting against Egyptians. These are the, if we talk about the Muslim Brotherhood, that they had the 90% of the Egyptians. You remember that Morsi won 51%, more than 51% of the vote, which means that 49% were against him. But if we are saying that the Muslim Brotherhood was doing something correctly, then what explains the millions who took to the streets in Egypt to denounce the leadership and the principles of Morsi regime? This created space for the military to come in, because you remember that when Morsi came to power, he reduced the powers of the military. So he had already created problems with the military from the very word go, and so they were just waiting for this opportunity. And when the people came up, they decided to seize that opportunity to say, man, you have been there for long, your time is up, leave and let's go. And the military is not controlling Egypt. We have the head of the constitutional
Yes, there's an interim administration.
There's an interim constitution, a civil interim constitution. And just the fact that he appointed the prime minister means that he's executing, he's exercising powers. We are looking at what is happening. We don't know about the gymnastics happening in the background, whether he was imposed somebody to be part of it or not. Now, when I talk about the Western world, that is why America delayed before reacting, because America was as confused as other Europeans and Asian and China and even Africans. It was a confused situation. It was an Egyptian problem, and they need to solve the problems with themselves. Democracy is possible. It's possible. We need people, we need African leaders who will listen to the people, who will listen to the majority of the people. We have members of the Muslim Brotherhood who were against Morsi, because there were millions of people on the street. You cannot explain that only 10% of those who were against the Muslim Brotherhood were on the street. They are not up to millions. It's just a minority. They're just a minority. Now, all of them, they were included there. They were saying that we needed an Egyptian for ourselves. We needed an Egyptian where the people, we have a say. Other African leaders should learn from this and know that the people, we one day have their say.
Good. Well, I really appreciate that clarification there, Mr. Tamfu.
I want to comment. If you
Yes,
don't mind.
yes, no, go ahead, Mr.
I want to comment. I want to say, like he said, that democracy has to be learned like a baby learning how to walk. For a nation like Egypt, which we know the history, has been ruled for many years by military dictatorships. Anwar Sadat, and then followed by the other man who went away, Hosni Mubarak. For many years, Egypt was stable under those military dictatorships. The Egyptians had their own problems, but we hardly heard about their complaints in the streets like we saw in the last in the last 2 years. I think Mohamed Morsi's problem was, instead of coming to power and addressing Egypt's current developmental issues, energy, which is a problem now, which I follow up for Egypt, or I follow up what is happening in Egypt. They have serious energy problems in Egypt now. The people need energy. They need even 2 bulbs or 40 watts. The people have their own problems. You don't have to emphasize on religious fanaticism.
Yes.
Like he was trying to abrogate onto himself. I think there was a time he wanted some maximum powers.
Indeed.
Yeah, there was a time the people were on the street because mostly he wanted to, what kind of decree, a constitutional approval for him to have
more authority than
maximize the powers, you know. That's why people.
That was actually the last straw on the camel.
Yeah, they started going to the streets against that. That referendum will not pass and all this. So he emphasized on religious fanaticism, which in the modern world of democracy, when you come to power, address economic and developmental issues. What their people need: water, electricity, road infrastructure, medical care, hospitals, and the rest. Don't start talking too much on religion, because religion per se doesn't bring development.
Now, Mr. James Fontem, was Morsi right to have been thrown out by his own military after just a year?
I don't think the military had to get him out. A country like Egypt is a country that we all know has gone through several stages of development. And when democracy came in with elections, civilians taking over power to control things, I felt change was coming. Unfortunately, the army did what it did, and I want to say that I think it would be very difficult to have peace in Egypt. It would be very difficult.
Now, of course, really looking at that aspect, we want to also note that as President Mohamed Morsi was ousted, this caused the Egyptian country as a member state of the African Union to now go on suspension. So we're going to transition now to this next image, which is going to help us understand exactly why the AU has come forward to play its own role as leading the African continent to unify states and regulate stability.
Well, on that spot, the African Union is willing to accept Egypt back in its fold as soon as the country gets a democratically elected leader. Head of the AU, Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, said during a visit to Germany that the AU regulations are clear on the country's eligibility for membership. Bloodshed since the ousting of Morsi has opened deep divisions in the Arab world's most populous country. The Muslim Brotherhood has refused to take part in the political process and is demanding that the deposed leader be reinstated.
So it's nothing against Egypt, it's just an existing rule of the AU. But the same rule says we have to engage with the country until it comes back to constitutionality. So as soon as Egypt comes back and have a leadership that is elected, that comes through their constitutional process, then they will come back to the.
And we see the AU coming forward, of course, to stand in the forefront of African politics to find, should we say, an amicable situation, just like it was pointed out there. It's not against Egypt, but it's to give a capacity for dialogue to go forward. But as we were realizing in our dialogue, it seems the Muslim Brotherhood has been adamant even to come to the tables and talk. And that's exactly what seems to be the problem in Egypt. We have the Muslim Brotherhood somehow, in its own way, behind Mohamed Morsi, seeking more authority and not playing democracy the way even the citizens of that country would have allowed it to continue to exist. But unfortunately, this aspect of military coming forward to oust Mohamed Morsi is what even some Egyptians till now have voiced their own uncertainty about. Because this has always been a replaying occurrence in African politics. Military coups. Well, Mali had its own issue earlier this year, going back several years as well. Nigeria was dominated, and to me at times I look at Nigerians' history as even benefiting from military coups to a certain extent, because we see now the democratic instability and infrastructure that it does have. So the next question linking to this aspect in Egypt, I want to put it to our panelists looking at the evolution of Pan-Africa, Egypt, the value of the statesmanhood of Nelson Mandela to seek extremes as being a last resort and dialoguing democratically in politics. Why is it that African politics seem to always be dominated by military intervention? I want to start with you, Mr. Tamfu.
Greed. That's a simple answer.
Yes, why must we always resort to force?
Greed. We have our leaders are quite greedy. These are people who they are larger. They think that they are larger than humans. They are drunk with power. They believe that after them is them. And so, when the people speak, and the military is usually on the part of the people, like Mr. James said, they should emulate what Nelson Mandela did.
Really?
This is somebody who came to power in 1994, and when it was 1999, he said goodbye. Yes. He had the possibility of extending his mandate to 5 years.
He even took salary cuts.
He was giving that to charity.
It's amazing.
To charity.
Yes.
You know, how would you see a military coming into play in that kind of a situation? How? It's impossible. The military as well as the people loved him because he loved the people and he loved the military as well. When we have leaders around the continent who decide to overstay in power, who believe that without them their countries cannot function, what do you expect? The people get wary of that, as well as the military. And when the people get wary, the military begins to get wary. The military in Egypt realized that it was impossible for Mohamed Morsi to leave power if it did not intervene. And they saw something coming. Violence was on the way.
Indeed.
Violence was in the making. And this guy was there. He said, I'm not leaving. Your guys, the ministers are resigning. Your advisors are resigning. Everybody is running away from you. And you say, I'm still there. To talk with who? Power. Greed. That's the problem. We should learn from Nelson Mandela to understand that when we are in power, it's because the people put us there. And if you are in power and you are depending on the weapons operated by the military, know that the military will turn against you and use those weapons against you in the name of the people. And the Egyptian military did something wonderful. When they overthrew him, they immediately relinquished power to civilian rule. They said, no, we didn't take this to remain with it. You guys should go on with it. You have 6 months to organize elections, presidential and parliamentary elections. Make sure that the country is brought back to order. Make sure that we have a president, we have a parliament with parliamentarians. Make sure that after this, we become part of the African Union. And make sure that you dialogue with the Muslim Brotherhood, which is becoming very difficult. Mandela stood for dialogue and truth. That is why he created the commission, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. We should learn from him. Those are simple things, simple principles, done by human beings. I sometimes wonder whether these guys are human beings or not. Done by human beings. Something, you go there, you get there. When it's time, your time is up, you go. Simple.
Actually, and that's it. They should go, Mr. Mengo. I see you shaking your head.
Yeah, I'm shaking my head because what he said is really, is really pertinent. People should learn to be humble. Leaders should learn to serve in humility. You already have the title president, I don't know, chairman, whatever big title people want, and maybe monies.
Honorable.
Monies also,
Dr.
I know the money
Chairman.
issue. People are afraid of poverty. You want to be in power because you are afraid of poverty. If you are not in power, maybe. Nobody should think in that context. People should learn to be humble. I think borrowing Mandela's lesson after leaving prison and beginning his negotiations with Frederick de Klerk up to this moment that he's about dying, or maybe have another couple of weeks, I don't know, God knows. Africa, the whole continent should borrow from that experience of Mandela post-prison and up to the point where At the age of, I think, 80, he could have taken another second-year term. There are many leaders who are 80 and above in Africa. But Mandela, after 5 years, in 99, relinquished a democratic power which he got through elections, and Thabo Mbeki took over, and after Thabo Mbeki we'll have Jacob Zuma now today, and the South African experience, we should learn from that. That is democracy. Those people are staying 5 years and going away. Others are coming in, like in the US where you stay for 8 years maximum, and you got to go.
And that's in 2 terms.
Yeah, in 2 terms. You got to go after
segments.
8 years. You are not the smartest guy in the country. Other smart guys will come and do the same job for the benefit of the people. And the Egyptian people are the people for whom the military is acting. Like he said, the military is defending the people's interests. And the strongest person in the country is the military because they got the arms. You can go on TV and shout and all that, but when the gun comes in, you keep quiet. That is it.
Yes, we've talked about power. We earlier talked about power. And when we talk about power, we think of money. When you have money, anybody who has money gets to power, he has power. But another power, which is opposite, that other one is gun. So the military are the owner of the guns. So when you go into power, you get into power, you have a certain fame. But your life is in the hand of the military people. You yourself used to give your hand to tie. So they tie your hand, and then whenever you don't do as the one, they can remove you at any time. They use their gun. So that's why military are becoming always into power. And they're eager to come, and they know that at any time they can remove you. That's the problem with Africa. Because Africa, their own, I don't know if they can call it democracy, but their own way of, because they consider the head like a chieftaincy. Actually. They go and sit.
Forever.
But they don't know that
it's like it's rooted in the tradition.
When you don't love people, don't go into power. When you don't understand, like when we are talking of Egypt, no leader or the former one has not tried to see why the people are going on the road to play, or to what do they need. Because they think that they will just need to change the head of state. But you know, people want to be free. Because even the same thing that happened with the Libyan, in Libya, people are there, they're talking of maybe that their leaders are using a certain power, excessive, etc. They are not free at all to move, to express themselves. That's the same thing that happened with Egypt. People want to be free. And you cannot take them back to religious concept, which is going to make them again tied in a certain way. So that's why they don't want. They want to be free like any other people of the Western country. Anyway, people want to live today like the Western country people. Yeah. Even you hear us, even people here in Africa, all over in Sahara, they want to live like European people. We move, we have to express ourselves freely anywhere we are, which is difficult in some areas like maybe the Maghreb, the Arab people who have the religious belief. Stop them from doing this, from going here and there. But they want to be free. They want to be like Western people. They want to dress anyhow. They want to do this and that. And mostly do not understand what the people really want.
Actually.
So for you, because there's always a gap between the leaders and the population. Don't go into them to know exactly why have they come to the road. They don't have somebody who come out to express it. But when people go to the road, you cannot gather their problem.
Yes, you can't get their opinion when they're already
each one has his own problem. Mm-hmm. Not all of us have the same problem. Maybe you because you are not eating, you because you are not free, you because you don't have this, you because, and then so when somebody comes to power, you have to go back to the population and know exactly in gross modo what do they want, what is their main problem. When they get the information here and there, and then now analyze it, go, these people want this, but don't bring them to a certain system that is going to keep them in captivity once more. Yes. So I say that is the main problem. That's why when you have God, you have a power, so you can come back.
Actually.
And if we are not careful, we're going to come back to military, in so many countries in Africa.
Yes, now, let me put this question now to you in a different form now, Mr. Fontaine, before we'll start rounding up. We're looking at this aspect of the military coming forward, and from our various panelists, it seems to be relevant. It makes sense at times. But in a situation where you discover that the military instead does the opposite, they don't take authority administration and give it to the people. They now themselves want to conduct the administration. What alternatives now do the people have?
I think those who are in leadership should understand that once a revolt starts, you should not allow it to degenerate. You should start dialogue immediately. Because when people sit and already give you the list of problems and give you directives, if you cannot dialogue with them yourself, you should find a committee to dialogue with those who are posing the problem. And that is what has happened in Egypt for the two rebellions that have had. They have not initiated or negotiated dialogue at the time the ultimatums are coming up. And it goes so far to what we see now, because most of those who go for those revolts or rebellions, they are not there for politics. Some of the hearts have been bought, because we have in many countries where revolts like that have given room for those who do not have to take from those who have.
Actually,
and that is exactly what is happening in Egypt. And we think that the military did what it did because it wanted to save the situation, but it did not also see the other side of it, that civilians do not reason like the military. Yes, those are two different types of people in the community. If the military took over, and by the time they were trying to follow the constitution by handing over the power to the Constitutional Council, if they made arrangements to put in place exactly why they have put the president away, I think things would have gone a little bit faster. But now, as we are at now, it would take some time for peace to go back to Cairo, because those who were put out, they want to go back. They don't want to negotiate. And if they stay in their position of non-negotiation, you can imagine that looting and all the other things will continue. And we have always pleaded as Africans that it is better to dialogue and not to use force, because once force comes, it's difficult to go back to the table.
Actually, and that is the reality that is there. We see Adli Mansour, the interim president, trying his best to lay a roadmap which can lead Egypt back to stability earliest 2014 if all of the players will come to the table and dialogue. And that is the essential that we have learned, essentially, talking about Nelson Mandela, to group all of these concepts together in this edition of Pan-Africa Vision. Dialogue essentially is the way for African politics. And when we're talking about African politics, it all falls under the banner of Pan-Africanism, which we do know Mandela undoubtedly was. He himself, in February 1962, was a part of the Pan-African Freedom Movement for East Central and as well Southern Africa. And he did go to Addis Ababa in Ethiopia as a member of the Pan-African Congress in 1959, led as part of a delegation sent by the ANC. Now, Mandela has two sides. That's what I'm trying to bring out. We have the dialoguing Mandela, and then we have his aspect and work in the ANC that, when pushed to the wall, he did, of course, allow the rights for the ANC to build a militant faction which went forward to, we can say in modern day terms, they would say use terrorist actions to bomb certain government facilities to get their point of view across to the South African apartheid regime, that when your back is against the wall, without having the military to support them, they had to arm themselves and say no means no. Now, we're not saying that this is, of course, a rightful path. We have to accept that it was done only as a last resort. Yeah. That is really the reality behind Mandela. He took it as a last resort, and then imprisoned, came forward, and rather than staying in that leftist mentality of violence, he still concluded his regime the way that he did, in peace. And of course the AU did evolve behind his initiatives. Kwame Nkrumah too, one of the founding fathers. We had the integration with one civil rights movement from the United States, W.E.B. Du Bois. All these individuals gave birth to Pan-Africanism, which evolved into the AU. Now the AU exists today, but the question I want to bring out now, when we're talking of Pan-Africanism, which is really what Mandela in his legacy is leaving behind for Africa, the true image of a Pan-African statesman running a state according to these principles and leaving that example for everyone, blessed his memory as he is alive and when he will go away. Now we're looking at Pan-Africanism. Is it realistically being pursued by African governments? I want to start with you, Mr. Tamfu. Is Pan-Africanism realistically being pursued by
African leaders?
Yes, our African leaders.
As propagated by Nelson Mandela.
Yeah.
I think it's a very tough question. But when you look at what is happening on the continent, especially the Francophone Africa, I doubt whether Pan-Africanism is a reality. Most of the leaders there still rely a lot more on France. France still has a lot of influence on them. France is dictating, is telling them what to do. They are winning the contracts here and there, and it's a very big problem. Independence for the African continent is still very far-fetched in many African countries. In reality, it's only South Africa that is independent, and to an extent, Ghana and Nigeria in part. A lot of African countries are still depending on the instructions coming from Europe, the Americas, and Asia. And how can we evolve as Pan-African activists with this kind of ideology? Nelson Mandela did not permit that. He realized that if I collaborate with these people in this way, they are going to dominate me. They are going to dominate my country when I'm not around. That is why when America invaded Iraq, he was the very first world leader, because Nelson Mandela is a world figure. He's not really an African figure. Actually. But in the African context, he was the first African leader to denounce. He blamed America and said what they were going to do was not correct. This is independence. This is Pan-Africanism that we're talking about. This is an African leader who is able to tell the other one in the other country, the big brother, so to say, that look, you blame us here, but what you are doing there is worse than what we are doing here.
Correct.
And I cannot tolerate that. If he had the means, he would have stopped America from invading Iraq. That is why he had problems with Bill Clinton and Tony Blair at the time, although everything was resolved after a while. Now, when you look at Nelson Mandela, I just wanted to come in when you were talking something about radicalism, dialogue. When you look at Nelson Mandela, this is somebody who, at the age of 26, helped in founding the Youth League of the African National Congress, the ANC. And before coming to be one of the founding members of the ANC, Youth League, he took part in a nationwide strike to demand for the reduction of transport fares. So you see that radicalism. In his autobiography, he says that he inherited rebellious nature from his father. His father was not always on good terms with the colonialist. I don't want to say the white man, with the colonialist. He was not always on good terms with the colonialist. So this is somebody who was growing up as a radical person growing up. He changed entirely. He understood that dialogue and reconciliation and truth, that these principles were very important in the management of humanity when he was at Robben Island and the other prisons. That is where the mentality of Nelson Mandela changed. He understood that we could maintain our African culture, we could maintain our African way of life, and still work with these people. And that is what the African leaders should be doing now. We should have leaders who will be able to say, we don't permit that here. That is for you. The question of homosexuality is a big topic now. It's coming from somewhere else. But there are African leaders that are. It's not our culture.
Yes, especially
it has
after
nothing
Barack
to do
Obama
with
visited Senegal.
They've been imposing it on us.
Imposing us. It has nothing to do with us.
Totally.
We need to have African leaders who will say that no.
Definitely. And that, of course, is where we're going to cut the end of this particular discussion here on Pan-Africa Vision. I know that there's really so much that we could continue to evolve, and we know that you in the House, too, are surely very touched, and we'll be praying that you will continue to follow this program as we'll be developing more concepts, looking at the world through Pan-Africa Vision. I have been your host, Ambe Foko, and we have been treating the role and value of our great epic statesman, Nelson Mandela. We pray, of course, that he does live as long as possible, but knowing none will live forever, we know God has kept him a place as he will make his transition. Thank you. Continue to enjoy Pan-Africa Vision, and of course, want you to enjoy Afric Media and our subsequent programs. Thank you. Have a good day, or perhaps good evening, wherever you are on the globe. Thank you.